Welcome to the Woman's Connection. I'm Barrie Switzen, your moderator. The Woman's Connection is a program about events shaping women's lives and helping one gain authentic power on a personal or professional level. So won't you stay tuned?
Welcome. So many things happen in a woman's life, but one of the mysteries that concerns all of us is what happens to us after menopause, especially sex. And with me is Dr. DePree, and we're going to talk about menopause, sex, and how we can live a fulfilling life afterwards. And I would like to welcome Dr. DePree.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Nice to have you.
I'm happy to be here, Barrie.
You wrote a book, Yes You Can. What prompted you to write the book?
Well, I'm a gynecologist who's been in practice for 27 years. And about 10 years ago, I started to focus my practice on more specifically perimenopause and menopausal women's health. And when patients enter my practice, they fill out a very extensive questionnaire about their history. And about 8 or 10 of those questions are specifically sexually related. And I immediately became aware of the dissatisfaction women were expressing around their sexual health. So as I moved through caring for those women and started opening the door of conversation around sexual health, it became apparent that it was a really difficult time for so many women, and they were experiencing significant changes that they were not anticipating, and it was very disruptive for many women.
What is the difference? Okay, let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
What is the difference between sexual arousal and sexual desire?
A somewhat simple way of thinking about it is sexual desire is really a brain function. Desire starts really in our brains. Arousal is more of a physical response to that desire.
Now, how does that change before menopause, going through menopause, and after menopause?
I'm going to use some generalizations for our conversation today, but obviously there are so many nuances and individual experiences here. But generally speaking, women who transition through menopause, in the absence of estrogen, are going to experience a loss of desire and probably more significantly a loss of arousal or the physical response. Estrogen has a huge impact to a woman's body, really from head to toe. And by definition, menopause means the absence of estrogen. So all of those areas that estrogen has had an influence are now going to be changed as a result of that. And the genitals, or vagina and vulva, are going to be impacted the most.
All right, well, from what I understand, when you go through menopause, sometimes your hormones do change, but you pick up a lot of the male hormones too, or am I saying this right, or clue me in?
Sure. Yes, in a way you are. So the definition of menopause is the absence of periods for 12 months. But that really comes from ovarian failure. And I explain to women that it's really the only time we have an endocrine gland fail. And generally speaking, we don't do anything about it. We expect women to just carry on their lives and act as though nothing's happened. But the consequences of ovarian failure and now the absence of estrogen and progesterone, again, has a significant impact. Meanwhile, even though women are menopausal, their ovaries are going to continue to be a source of testosterone. Testosterone levels are going to slowly decline as we age. Actually, it peaks when we're age 25. And over our lifespan will just continue to gradually decline. So it's not that we have more testosterone, but the relative balance of hormones changes significantly, which can give testosterone maybe a little bit more prominence relative to estrogen.
All right, let me just ask, because I'm bouncing all over the place with questions here. I've seen young girls mature much younger than what was in my day or even possibly your day, and there's all kinds of controversy about why, because of the chemicals in the milk that they're drinking, they develop much earlier. And now you're saying that we peak at 25. What happens to these young girls who are developing earlier?
Our natural source of testosterone is adrenal and ovaries. And specifically, testosterone levels, generally speaking, peak around age 25. That probably isn't varying a great deal depending on the age of puberty. And the average age of menopause for an American woman is 51, but can happen naturally anytime from age 40 to 58. So basically 98 to 99% of us will become menopausal naturally sometime in that span.
What are some of the pre-menopausal symptoms somebody's going to get?
So we use the term peri-menopause for leading up to menopause, and that on average can last anywhere from 4 to 8 years, and it's primarily heralded by a change in periods. The frequency of periods changes. They might get closer, they might get farther. The days of bleeding might get shorter or longer. The amount of bleeding may be less or more. So any variation on periods may change. Night sweats may start to become more apparent for women, often following a cyclic pattern. Mood may be disrupted, sleep may be disrupted, vaginal dryness may begin. So there is an array of possible symptoms that may occur. Some women will have none of the above.
What can a woman do to ease this process? Because, I mean, you hear all about women with night sweats. And I was always cold, so I know my temperature has risen since I've gone through this. But what can a woman do?
I think, importantly, a woman can understand what to expect as a result of menopause. I explain to women, you know, a lot of things get put in the hormone bucket that don't necessarily belong in that bucket. And a lot of times it's our lifestyle. I think we're our own worst enemies sometimes. Women create a really complicated life often. And especially when you think about that 50-ish time of our lives with raising children and launching children, oftentimes career brings new opportunities or maybe career crises, aging parents. We're a mother, a wife, a daughter, an employee, and oftentimes we haven't paid much attention to our own bodies and health. So I think it is a unique time for women to focus on self, which we're not often accustomed to doing. And I tell women, you're now high maintenance, and you really need to behave that way. So diet means more. Whole foods, not skipping meals. Exercise is a must. I think if you're going to put your eggs in one basket and looking for a return on what's going to impact the most, it's going to be exercise. Try to modify stress, adequate sleep, all those things we know, but we haven't really practiced.
You're from Michigan.
I am.
And I was from Michigan. And when I moved to New York in 1979, there was a woman by the name of Dr. Ruth Westheimer. She changed the outlook for sex. It was like Monday morning conversation. Everybody was talking about her radio program. Do you think that today women are more open about the sex than ever before?
You know, that's a great question, Barrie, because yes, I think it's talked about, but yet this idea of how it changes, especially around menopause, often comes as a surprise. And I think when we become menopausal and understand periods are done, hot flashes, yes, those are commonly understood. Oftentimes the changes that occur sexually are a little bit delayed. It may be 2 to 5 years after your menopausal experience that you begin to have sexual changes. So women don't connect it with the idea that it might have been menopausal related and hormones might have a role in it. So I think we need to have some further understanding and discussion around sexual health, especially as we age and the natural changes that occur.
As we change, is there a special formula to maintain our vaginal health, as you might want to say?
Well, I did a website specifically around this called middlesexmd.com, and I did it because I felt like women did not understand or know what to expect, and they didn't know how to address the symptoms or treat them. So your idea of, is there a way to help or are there some things to do? The website is set up in 5 different categories. The first is knowledge, trying to help women understand what's happening and what's changing. The second is vaginal health, discussing this progression of dryness to literally pain with intercourse. The statistic is up to 50% of women are having painful intercourse 5 years postmenopausally. That's a lot of women and a lot of discomfort and a lot of dissatisfaction in relationships. The other consequences of that is arousal. So the other category of the recipe is genital arousal and what changes there. And the consequence of absence of estrogen means less blood supply to the genitals and more difficulty with arousal and orgasm. Pelvic tone, we know muscles are changing as we age everywhere in our body, and the pelvic floor is no different. Orgasm in the end is intense contractions of the pelvic floor muscles. So we want women to understand how that's connected at this stage of life and what they can do to try to regain or maintain sexual comfort and enjoyment. And then the 5th category is the emotional intimacy and the emotional component. And we don't want women to forget that that's a critical part of enjoying sex.
What can a woman do to maintain vaginal health?
Yes, the natural consequence of menopause to the vagina specifically is that it's going to get more narrow and thin and shorten and less elastic. So you can imagine how that translates for women as they move further into menopause and try to enjoy intercourse. So the first thing that they should do and can do easily is use a vaginal moisturizer. There are lubricants and there are moisturizers. Lubricants are pretty familiar to many women. It's what you take out on Friday night when you're about to have intercourse and you apply to your partner yourself to take away some of the friction and make sex more comfortable. But a moisturizer is probably more critical and important, and that's a product over-the-counter, non-hormonal, non-prescription, which we carry many varieties on my website, and that's what a woman will insert into the vagina 2 to 3 times a week to try to maintain and prevent some of the loss of moisture over time. So the first thing on the to-do list before it becomes uncomfortable or painful is to think about moisturizing, just like we're going to do for, we try to stay ahead of the wrinkles and the dryness of our face, for instance. We should be thinking about that for our vagina. And unfortunately, we don't think about it because it's been so low maintenance for so many years.
I like the low maintenance. I'm just thinking, you're saying, okay, as you advance, it gets drier. And then you have a man who has got his own separate problems. Is there a solution? I don't have a question here, so I'm not sure what the question is for you to have a solution.
Well, I would say for most sexual concerns regarding women and pain with intercourse, there is a solution. So having a careful exam, bringing it up to your physician, which is something we should talk about too, because physicians, providers, nurse practitioners, historically we're really terrible at offering this conversation to women. The statistics tell us only about 17% of healthcare providers kind of crack the door open for women to bring up this topic with their providers. So it takes a lot of courage sometimes for women to have this conversation. So the first thing is we'd like our providers or practitioners to make women comfortable having the conversation. And then we want women to bring it up to say, I've noticed a change, this is what's happening, because a careful exam can oftentimes find a solution. And there are vulvar dermatosis that go on that may need certain treatment options. It may be the atrophy we talk about, which can be addressed. There are vaginal dilators, so if women have had experience narrowing and want to regain function, we can use these graduated cones to kind of gently stretch and regain some patency of the vagina. So there are a number of options. It's really a matter of specifically what's causing the problem for you.
Besides the cone, you also sell vibrators.
Yes.
What is the reaction from women when you bring this topic up?
The great thing about the field of gynecology is with the majority of my patients, I have a special history of time together and oftentimes have gone through different life situations with them. So trust has to be part of that conversation. And I often am able to sense a woman's comfort with having that conversation and introducing something like a vibrator. So to step back one step would be to say the vagina absolutely has a use it or lose it phenomenon. And I would be remiss if I didn't say the best way to stay comfortable with the vagina and having sex is to have sex. Literally, that makes it most comfortable. So if top of the list, how can I keep sex comfortable? It's to have sex, because every time you have sex, you're encouraging that blood supply. You're keeping the vagina active, and the elasticity is going to be more readily maintained. So for those women who maybe aren't, for a variety of reasons, they may be single, it may be their partner, that's where a vibrator comes in. So I have one where I keep in all my exam rooms. I show, they're nicely designed, the make, the ease of use. I have them hold it in their hand, show the different strengths, the different vibratory modes, so women can see and understand exactly what it might provide for them. And as a clinician and healthcare provider, we advocate that women own a vibrator and utilize a vibrator really for vaginal health.
I guess I'm speechless, because when you think about it, people don't talk about this. And I know there's a couple stores, I think it was one in the Village, it was the Pink Pussycat or something, that was like, oh, I'm going to the Pink Pussycat, or nobody wanted to say that they were going there and buying something. Are women, okay, well, it goes back to how comfortable women feel about their bodies to discuss it. Is this changing?
Yes, I think it is changing. And I think you bring up an interesting point. So when I started doing this and focusing on sexual health more explicitly, it was hard for me to refer women to those stores or some of the websites that were available, because the array of products there were off-putting often. The design, the names, and it wasn't exactly what women were comfortable doing. So the idea with the website Middlesex MD was also to allow women to have a relatively small selection of products designed specifically for women who want classy options and not the off-putting, crazy-looking things. And they'd be more comfortable in their own home, looking at options, ordering online, comes in a nice, tasteful white box, and really it's been carefully selected. I actually went to an adult novelty expo to look at more things than I would have ever wanted to come up with a select list of products specifically for women that were functional and affordable and effective.
So keeping yourself lubricated, I'm just kind of curious, what is the oldest man and woman that you know of who've ever had sex?
I have a woman in her late 80s who is being treated with localized estrogen or vaginal estrogen to maintain sexual function. And I had an 82-year-old who had been widowed in her mid-50s. We had together figured out it had been about 30 years she had been single, alone, had not had intercourse, and she met a gentleman at bingo and was anticipating resuming sexual activity, and we were able to accomplish that for her. So there isn't really any definition or parameters for age. It's really as long as the relationship values that and function is there for, especially men. Certainly as men age, things change for them as well. We can usually make it possible for women.
Now, in your book, you talk about the two-finger test. What exactly is that?
So generally speaking, if a woman can insert 2 fingertips into the vagina, she probably can have intercourse. So the size required to accommodate 2 fingertips probably would allow her to have a penis placed in the vagina for intercourse.
And if she doesn't pass the two-finger test, that's when the cones come in?
Yes, so if one single fingertip slides in comfortably, but 2 is causing too much stretch or discomfort, Again, an exam can maybe help, but then the idea of maybe I need to do something to regain comfort, and that's where the vaginal dilators, you use them at home on your own terms and in the comfort of your home with a lubricant, and they're graduated in size, and then you can manage and control how that stretch occurs.
With all the sexual liberation, you have the pill, you have menopause, and it turns out that the highest percentage of sexually transmitted diseases are seniors. What can somebody do to prevent it, be aware of it? How do they check it? What do they need to know?
You're absolutely right. And again, for a variety of reasons, women, men find themselves in situations where they have new partners, maybe multiple partners. And while the teens and 20s are thinking about pregnancy prevention, and so they're thinking about condoms for and disease prevention, I think that population has gotten the message and knows the message. We sort of forget in these older years that that's still important. So really it goes back to screening and having your partner screened to understand you're entering the relationship without an active infection before you initiate intercourse, and most women are eager to have that conversation in advance of initiating sex so they can be assured of that. And then condoms until you understand this as a longer-term monogamous relationship. And I think disclosing to your practitioner that you are in a new relationship or you've had multiple partners and you need to be screened may be an appropriate conversation as well.
What exactly is the pH factor in one's body that we should be aware of?
So the vaginal pH, specifically the vaginal pH in a healthy, fully estrogenized vagina is low. It's acidic. It's around 4.0. And that means that it's got a bacterial milieu, a variety of bacteria that belong there that keep it that way. But it's really the estrogen component that directs that. So naturally, when women become menopausal, transition through menopause over time, the absence of estrogen contributes to a significant change in the pH. Specifically, the pH rises, becomes more basic, and over time, we're going to see a shift of the natural or normal bacteria that reside in the vagina. And especially during that transition time, women may be a little bit more vulnerable to infections. The two more commonly experienced might be yeast infections or bacterial vaginosis, or BV is what we would call that. And while those aren't sexually transmitted, again, the environment of the vagina may influence the likelihood of experiencing those infections.
Wow, a lot to think about.
Again, it's happening in the background and you don't really even know or understand that. So it's sort of fascinating, from age 15 to 50, you didn't think much about that. And it was life as usual. And then when things change and you have to pay attention to it, that can be a bit of a disconnect for women and they're not quite sure what to do.
In this last Olympics where the woman didn't do so well in the swimming meet and she blamed it on her period and it just got such notoriety. It was just like it cut through it all. And then she found out she was in third place, which was even better. But the thing was, she brought it right out. No holds barred.
It was remarkable. It was an interesting little breakthrough in this whole discussion, which was great. I think especially considering her cultural background, it was really felt to be kind of a landmark conversation to have. And women share so many things. We talk through so many details of our lives. But this idea of sexual health, for some reason, it's not always openly shared, and we're not always having those conversations with our friends. So my book was really an idea around women need to be better informed. Really, the primary motivation for this was I saw significant relationship disruption, divorce, relationships that didn't survive, primarily because sexual health wasn't maintained. And sometimes we can think about sex as the canary in the coal mine. It's kind of the early indicator of what's really happening here. And it can provide such an important aspect to a healthy relationship. And if it's suffering, if it's no longer present, it can really fray in other areas. So I want women to know that it can be there and be maintained, and there are things you can do about it and things you must do about it, because it's so critical often to the core of a relationship.
Let's talk about sexual desire and how it changes through the years.
So desire is a complicated aspect for women's sexual health and dependent on many factors: general health, medications, stress. But one thing is very helpful, I think, for women to understand is that generally speaking, as we age and as women transition through menopause, it's natural for desire to decline or decrease. It has nothing to do with the integrity of the relationship, and women often express this, deep satisfaction in the relationship, but a natural loss of desire. So science over the years taught us that desire was spontaneous and that women had desire. But we need to understand that changes for women. And Dr. Rosemary Bassan helped outline this, that instead of spontaneous, desire becomes more responsive for women. So instead of waiting for the desire or the drive to lead you to be sexual, you need to think about it more as a response. So our old model of desire led to arousal, orgasm, resolution, sort of the Masters and Johnson years. We now understand it's probably more ongoing and circular, and we probably don't step into a sexual encounter because of drive or desire. We do it in response to a cue from your partner. We're on vacation. It's your anniversary. He's been stressed at work. You want to give back in that way. So you don't necessarily start that event from the position of having a strong desire or drive, but you engage in sex, and once you do, desire will follow, arousal, ability to orgasm, and the cycle occurs. But I try to outline to women that waiting for spontaneous drive or desire to bring them into an encounter, they may be waiting a while. So the idea of being mindful, intentional, looking for the cues that will lead you into a sexual encounter oftentimes is a helpful way for women to think about this.
With all that's going on, everybody's stressed, and everybody doesn't want to admit maybe it's their problem. They have to change things. Do couples go into sexual therapy?
I would say sending a woman and or a couple to a therapist period can be a little bit of a hurdle for some individuals, and a sex therapist especially can be a bigger hurdle. So I think it's a careful conversation to have with women. I'm a gynecologist. I generally speak to the women. I often don't get to encounter the men in the relationship, or the partner for that matter in the relationship. But when you put it in the context of having these 30 years or however many years you are in a relationship, and you've done the routine, you often don't have to speak about this. It just happens. We understand it in some unique sense. But when we're trying to recreate it because it's now painful for you, or you've lost desire, a lot of times we don't have the language or the words to know how to bring up that conversation with our partner. That's where a therapist can be very helpful. They can help be that third person, that more objective person to lead the conversation. Because if I suggest to you that things are changing and we need to change the routine, it's easy to be defensive in that situation and think, what am I doing wrong, or what have I been doing wrong? And so having a therapist lead that conversation is often so much more successful for couples. And I go back to the canary in the coal mine. A lot of times, again, sex is a consequence of a fracture in some place of the relationship. And sex therapists don't start with sex. They start with understanding the relationship and the level of communication and where things are on a broader sense, but can narrow it down to sex and bring couples along and having a healthy conversation about it so they can address it and hopefully provide additional improvement and healing in that way.
In the closing moments of the show, what would you like to leave the audience with?
I think the two things I want women to think about more intentionally, another word for this would be mindfulness, is intimacy. And sometimes in our mundane day-to-day activities, we forget about that. In intimacy, I'm not talking about bedroom now, I'm talking about day-to-day interactions with that partner of yours. And just think about being more intentional in sharing touch and words that grow you closer together. And I think the other thing is that sex often becomes this habit and routine that's been repeated over and over again for many years. Think about novelty. Think about something new there and try to step out of your routine and set some new expectations for enjoying your sexual relationship.
Well, Doctor, thank you so much for joining us. Lots to think about and lots to be aware of. Thank you for joining us. I hope you've learned something about your sexual intimacy. If you have any questions, write us here at The Woman's Connection. Look forward to hearing from you.